But what's the answer to what you just heard? If he's not convicted then in the Senate, he gets off scot-free?
Sam, I think President Ford and President Carter had it right. We've got to find a way out of this that preserves the rule of law, that underscores the sanctity of the rule of law, yet doesn't do permanent damage to the office of the presidency. But they also indicated that any such censure move would need to be predicated on the president admitting that he'd lied under oath, that he had broken the law. I think that needs to be the basis for a censure resolution.
Let me interrupt, excuse me, but what makes you think he will ever admit that? Vice President Gore this past week once again said he did not believe the president is going to admit to something which Mr. Gore said the president doesn't think he's done.
Well, if there's one thing we can agree upon, Sam, it is that no person, not even the President of the United States, is above the law. No one who voted for Bill Clinton in 1996 did so with the intention of putting him beyond the law. He needs to reconcile himself with that fact. I hope he will save the country the ordeal of a attenuated tenure, a process of trial in the Senate, by short-circuiting that, by admitting that he has broken the law. It's up to the president now whether we can avoid an ordeal of a Senate trial. But he's going to have to make a self-sacrifice. He's going to have to finally come clean to the American people.
Mr. Greenwood, I'm puzzled a little bit by your confidence that there could be broad bipartisan support for censure. At the Rose Garden pep rally after the impeachment vote, Al Gore stood up in front of a group of Democrats and called Bill Clinton one of our greatest presidents. Now, what kind of censure resolution will they write for one of our greatest presidents?
Well, I think that's a very good point, and that is exactly, it was that grotesque display of celebration on the White House lawn after the impeachment in the House that caused me to decide that we needed to have a tough censure. Now, why would the president agree to a censure? Why would Democrats vote for a censure? There is enough evidence in the evidence room that has not been brought forward yet that wouldn't necessarily change the facts of the case, but I think would embarrass the president to such an extent that he would rather not have all of that brought out in public and would rather negotiate some kind of a censure resolution. And frankly, to answer the question, why would Democrats support it, I think if they got the suggestion that the president wanted it, Democrats are not in an easy political position, because to simply vote no is to appear to not see the seriousness of the president's offenses.
Mr. Franks, I gather Mr. Greenwood is really hinting at the answer to the question, what leverage do you have to get the president to agree to censure if you don't have the votes for impeachment? The leverage, I gather, would come from this evidence that Mr. DeLay has hinted about that's in the evidence room. Would you care to share with us why the president would be afraid of this? Do you know what he's talking about?
I know some of what Mr. Greenwood is speaking of and what Mr. DeLay has alluded to, but the bottom line is that a trial presents a great variable to the White House. No one knows precisely where such a trial would go, how long it would last, for how long it could potentially paralyze the federal government. There is an enormous downside to this president engaging in a trial. No one knows where it would go, nor how quickly it could be concluded. I think there's more than adequate incentive for the president to finally come to terms with the fact that he has broken the law, admit it, so we can move beyond this scandal, put it behind us, and move on to issues that are far more consequential to most of the families in my district.
What if, Mr. Greenwood, the president says, well, all very well for you to write into a censure resolution that I lied under oath, but I didn't and I won't sign it? Then what happens?
Well, I think then you proceed with the trial. I think what the way this would come about would be you initiate the trial, you bring witnesses in, and at some point there would be, I think, a critical mass of senators who would determine amongst themselves that a censure is the direction to go.
But
they temporarily table the articles of impeachment. They move the censure resolution through the Senate to the House and send it to the President. And the deal, if you will, would be, Mr. President, with Orrin Hatch and Henry Hyde looking over your shoulders, you sign that resolution of censure. You sign that bipartisan rebuke. You do, and the trial is over. You don't, and the trial proceeds.
What happened to the accusation that the president has committed crimes? I mean, if you censure the president, do you say, we don't think he's committed crimes, but we think his conduct has been such he deserves censure? Or are you saying, yes, you have committed crimes, perjury, obstruction of justice, but for you, because Mr. Frank says no man is above the law, for you, it's censure. It's not any worse punishment.
No, I think it's clear that he did commit crimes. I don't think that's even in dispute. And I would prefer a resolution of censure that did not protect him from criminal prosecution after the end of his term. I think he should be subject to those penalties. The independent counsel could bring those charges after Mr. Clinton leaves office.
Mr. Frank, what would censure mean for you?
Sam, I think we have to recognize that in our criminal justice system, those who acknowledge the fact that they have committed a crime are often treated more leniently than those who continue to flaunt the law. There's adequate precedent here as long as the president will finally make the threshold admission that he has broken the law.
Thank you very much, Representative Bob Franks and Representative James Greenwood, for being with us today. And coming next, censure versus an impeachment trial with Republican Senators John Ashcroft and Rick Santorum. And later, presidential historians Michael Beschloss and Douglas Brinkley.
From ABC News, This Week with Sam Donaldson and Cokie Roberts. Brought to you by GE. From power generation to medical systems, we bring good things to life.
Introducing the remarkably innovative GE Profile Performance range with a revolutionary bridge that connects burners so you can cook any size dish. And its true temp oven is the most accurate in America, so you can also bake and broil like a gourmet. It's so versatile you could get carried away.
Dad, I usually just have cereal for breakfast.
Go, go, get it!
The incredible Profile Performance range, only from GE.
Just a thought, that's what Einstein said. Just a view of the future, 2 paces ahead. Thinking about me, thinking about you. All the good things a little good thinking can do. Good thinking means new ways of looking at things. Good Lisa was smiling cause she could see wings. Spring from the brush, with each stroke of genius. The good things a little good thinking can do.
Joining us now are Republican Senators John Ashcroft of Missouri and Rick Santorum of Pennsylvania. Gentlemen, thanks very much for being with us today.
Delighted to be with you.
Well, a lot of talk about censure rather than a full-blown Senate trial that comes to the conclusion of votes on the articles of impeachment. Where do you stand on that, Senator Ashcroft?
Well, you know, I think that the most profound and the strongest censure allowed in the Constitution has already been made. It's been made by the House of Representatives in its impeachment action. For it to impeach the president, the only elected president ever to be impeached in history, is the strongest censure that the Constitution allows. For us to try and do another censure, which would have some kind of teeth or consequence, would involve the Senate in an attempt to do what would be called a bill of attainder, which is unconstitutional itself. So I think the level of censure, which has already been demonstrated here, is the strongest that's allowed by our system. Anything else would just be, well, just be so much hot air.
So you want to go to a full-blown trial?
Well, I believe that we do have a responsibility to, when the House impeaches, that the Senate has a responsibility under the Constitution to try the impeachment. And in my judgment, that's our responsibility under the Constitution, and we should move toward that. It should be a speedy trial. It should not keep us from getting to our agenda. I believe that the displeasure that's been voiced by the public in many respects is a displeasure over our failure last year to address the agenda that they have for tax cuts, to do something about crime. We need to be protecting Social Security. We need to do something to provide a basis for excellence in education. And I don't think we should allow a trial to be protracted. This is something that should happen within a month. If we need to work from 5 to 9 instead of from 9 to 5.
Let's come back to the schedule in just a moment. Senator Santorum, how say you on Bill Clinton's fate? Censure, trial, all the way to a vote?
Yeah, well, first off, I agree with everything John Ashcroft said, that we do need to move to a trial, that's our constitutional responsibility. You know, I have to take issue with what seems to be the sentiment that somehow or another that the Senate needs to punish the president. That's not what we are setting out to do here. This is not about punishing the president. What we are doing, what the impeachment process is all about, is to protect the republic from someone who can no longer fulfill the duty of the presidency. And we are not here to mete out punishment, to fine him, to censure him. That's for the judicial branch. If the president should be punished for committing crimes, it should be done through the orderly process of bringing those charges up in a judicial setting and after he leaves the presidency.
Well, how do you answer the proposition that there are not the votes in the Senate, and I take it by extension, people who say this mean there won't be the votes after the trial is held, to actually remove the president, so let's not even go through the exercise?
Well, I think we have to look at two things. Number one, we have to look at, obviously, the case before us and Bill Clinton's fate, but we also have to look at the precedent we're setting for history. This is not just about Bill Clinton. This is about the Senate performing its constitutional duty, you know, only for the second time in the history of this country, and we have an obligation to do what's right for history, to set the precedent for future Senates to be guided by. And I think, as John said, this does not necessarily have to be a protracted trial. It should be one that we should take up quickly and probably dispense with rather quickly.
Senator Ashcroft, if there are not the votes there ever in the Senate, and you can take issue with that proposition if you choose, why go through a trial which will end with the president's acquittal and he's off?
Well, first of all, a person who's charged deserves a trial. And for us to sit and to weigh the evidence, and that's what I'll do. I'll weigh the evidence carefully and see whether or not the evidence supports the charges or whether the evidence refutes the charges. Americans are asked to do this on a daily basis. Americans sit in courtrooms. Average citizens do. This isn't beyond the capacity of the Senate. And someone said, well, should you have a trial or should you not have a trial if you know in advance what the outcome is? Well, it's a little bit prejudicial to say that none of the evidence would make a difference to anyone. I happen to believe that the Senate is a better body than that it would totally ignore the evidence. So I think we need to do our duty. We need to decide based on the evidence. Well, and I don't think you can say you're going to decide based on the evidence if you're not going to provide for the presentation of the evidence.
Senator Santorum, the public is being intrigued, if not exactly informed, by the hints that if Democrats would just go into the evidence room, they'd see evidence that would be sobering, and that this evidence is such that in order to prevent it being aired on the Senate floor, the president might therefore accede to a strong censure resolution. What are people talking about?
Well, I haven't seen that evidence either, but I think John is right. I think the president, in a sense, deserves a trial. I think it would be in the best interest of the country to get this matter really behind us. Get the evidence out there, allow senators to look at it. You know, as you know, George, we take a separate oath as senators we raise our hand and say we will be impartial arbiters and judge impartially. I plan on doing that. I don't know how anyone can say that, any senator can say that they've already determined how they're going to vote on this matter when we have to take an oath to say that we're going to be impartial in weighing the evidence. I think they obviously conflict. We should sit down, let the evidence come out, and at some point in time, even before we get through with the evidence, if a majority of senators determine that the trial should be ended, 51 senators can stop the trial at any point in time.
Senator Ashcroft, you're supposed to be impartial, but if you've been living on planet Earth for the last 11 months, you've seen a lot of this. You've read about it. You've seen the Starr report. What more evidence do you need? And in point of fact, do you need to call witnesses? Monica Lewinsky, for example. Do you see that happening in the Senate?
Well, I believe that the presentation of the evidence is appropriate, but it could well be that if the president would cooperate, we could stipulate to a lot of the facts. You know, this is going to be a trial presided over by Judge William Rehnquist. This is not Judge Ito. This isn't O.J.
Forgive me, let me interrupt you. You might want him to stipulate to such a basic fact as that he lied under oath, and it's quite clear he won't. What facts will he stipulate to?
Well, he could stipulate to what he said in the grand jury, so it wouldn't have to be presented exactly again and wouldn't have to be done as a basis of interrogation. There are a whole variety of things. whether or not he is the President of the United States, whether he has a responsibility in that job for law enforcement. They've asked him to do that basically with some of the interrogatories from the House. He may have different responses or more thorough responses to those now than he's had before. There's no reason for a long trial here. We should be able to work with this promptly. He deserves a speedy trial just like any other citizen, and America deserves a speedy trial so that we can get to our agenda of improving education, lowering taxes. Go ahead.
Senator Santorum, about that agenda and about taking up the valuable time of the Senate, as I understand it, last year, and not for the first time, the Senate missed all its deadlines on the appropriations process.
Yeah.
The first 3 months of any Senate year are not, shall we say, productive. Would this really be an impeachment trial, a delay in addressing what you call the agenda?
No, absolutely not. I mean, if we commence this trial on the 7th of January, the day after we were sworn in, as you know, George, it takes a month or two before we even have enough committee meetings to crank out enough bills to get any bills to the floor. We don't really get serious about passing legislation in Congress till mid to late February. It's usually a committee process. So we could have really a full-blown trial for a month or so and not really impede the actions of the Senate.
Gentlemen, does Larry Flynt intimidate you or any of your colleagues in the Senate, do you believe? Here is a man who says he has more evidence, 9 Republicans, maybe 1 Democrat, of sexual peccadillos. He says that he might not present the evidence in the Democrat because he says, I'm a good Democrat. But does that intimidate anyone?
Well, it doesn't intimidate. It doesn't intimidate me at all in the sense that, you know, we have a responsibility to do our job. We take an oath when we're sworn in to protect and uphold the Constitution. We're going to do our job and represent our constituents. And you know, we are constantly barraged, at least in our job, with reports and insults. And you just got to have a thick skin and keep going.
Senator Ashcroft?
Absolutely no intimidation there. And for anyone who's intimidated by threats from someone like Larry, they don't belong in the United States Congress or in the Senate. We take an oath to live up to the Constitution, our duty and responsibility. We shouldn't try to duck that responsibility here.
All right. Thank you very much, Senator Ashcroft, Senator Santorum, for being with us today.
Thank you.
Please come back. Coming up next, presidential historians Michael Beschloss and Douglas Brinkley. In a moment.
All the same. Completely identical. First it was sheep. Now it's tax advice. Isn't this cloning thing going a bit too far?
Turning on the light, I was immediately aware of something different. It was the same room. She was the same woman. Yet somehow, incredibly, something had changed.
The Enrich bulb from GE. Its innovative glass filters out rays that dull colors. Blues look bluer, reds redder. Almost everything looks better.
Her blue eyes blazed. Her black hair burned. She turned to me. I turned to her and said,
"That's some light bulb."
The incredible Enrich bulb, only from GE.
When a patient undergoes an asthma attack, they are literally gasping for breath.
When I have an asthma attack, it's really, really scary.
Asthma is caused by an inflammation of the lung. The new medicines that the pharmaceutical industry have created for asthma allow patients greater flexibility in their lifestyle. Hopefully, one day, no one will suffer from asthma anymore.
They are the sheep, and we are the shepherds. We tell them that college is the doorway. We tell them to prepare for the future. But the question remains, will we?
If suddenly your TV could receive only one broadcast network, ABC would be that network. The best dramas, including The Practice. Smart, suspenseful, electrifying. The best comedies, including Sports Night. By far the best new show of the season. It's worth repeating. If suddenly your TV could receive only one broadcast network, ABC would be that network.
Joining us now are two distinguished historians, Michael Beschloss and Douglas Brinkley. Gentlemen, thanks very much for coming in today.
Thanks, Sam.
Mr. Brinkley, you're in no relation to our former esteemed leader, David.
No relation at all.
Well, we're glad to have you. President Clinton is quoted in the New York Times. He was at a party, and he was asked, according to the writer, about impeachment and how did it feel to be impeached, and his answer was not bad. And he said that apparently within 10 or 20 years, historians would put this in context, meaning that it wouldn't be that bad at all. What do you think? What are historians of the future going to do?
I don't think too much of that, Sam. You know, Richard Nixon always said that years from now, for historians, Watergate is going to be a footnote. We're 25 years past the Nixon, at least Watergate, 24 years past the resignation. It's not a footnote. But on the other hand, if we were talking to Andrew Johnson in 1868, he might have said that future generations of Americans will see that I was unfairly impeached and the Congress was worried about things that had not much to do with crimes. He would have been right.
What about you, Mr.
I agree. The opening graph in any textbook in the future under Bill Clinton will mention impeachment, the first elected president to be impeached. After that, there'll be the debate of what the times were like. But I don't think Bill Clinton's going to be able to escape that negative verdict in the future.
What do historians base their conclusion on? You look back, both of you have written books about people long since dead. You didn't have a chance to interview them, perhaps. What do you base your conclusions on?
Well, first off, presidential greatness comes from having something major that it really occurred that's memorable from your administration. Forget the Lewinsky scandal. Just look at recent presidents. Franklin Roosevelt pulling the country through the Great Depression and World War II. Harry Truman, the creation of NATO, the Marshall Plan. Eisenhower, building the interstate highway system. Lyndon Johnson, the Great Civil Rights Act. Ronald Reagan in the showdown with the Soviet Union in the Cold War. You don't have something beyond impeachment that one can really grab a hold of Bill Clinton. People aren't going to line up to the Clinton Library in Little Rock to see the NAFTA pen under glass. And so I think there will be some positive aspects to his presidency, but they're going to be buried after the fact that it was a scandal-plagued administration.
Mr. Beschloss, what I'm trying to get at, and that's a good answer, but with you, is your great-great-great-grandson is going to write a book about Bill Clinton. He neither met him, saw him. I mean, what is the evidence that he's going to use? Is he going to look at a transcript of this week and see one of the president's White House aides spinning, for instance?
I'm sure he'll use this week as a very big source, Sam. I think one of the things that happens is you get hindsight. 50 years later, you know how a president's policies turned out. And it could be, for instance, that we find things in Bill Clinton's record that seem more important then than they do now. But the other thing you get is information. And we're going to be digging into all sorts of subterranean layers of the Clinton presidency, both good and bad, for a very long time. How that's going to affect the verdict of historians and later Americans, God only knows.
And there'll be a lack of information on certain aspects of the Clinton presidency because they're afraid of being subpoenaed. Hillary Clinton was given a gift, a tape recorder, which she sent back, saying, I don't want to have any tapes or a record for my memoirs. In other words, in many ways, Clinton's going to have a lot less papers or diaries from the White House time, which will be a deficiency for future historians.
Let me try once more, and then, George, I'm going to turn it over to you. Abraham Lincoln, let's just take the Gettysburg Address. We have the words and we have the times, but if we had a videotape, would his delivery, which historians tell us was not great compared, was it Governor Seymour or something, high, thin voice and all that, would that have made a difference? For instance, if you look at a videotape 100 years from now of Bill Clinton, he will look as he is, warm, I suppose, and reaching out and wonderful. Does that matter to historians?
It does. It matters more to the general public. You know, there's a poll, Sam, that is taken of Americans about every 10 years by Gallup. Who was the greatest president of the United States? And you know who wins? John Kennedy has won 1975, 1985. He's dipped a little bit. Now he's behind Abraham Lincoln. But Americans, for some reason, think that John Kennedy was a greater president than Lincoln, George Washington, Franklin Roosevelt. So I think that is sort of the mini-series mentality They like his looks. He died young. This was someone who was a great celebrity. Historians don't think so well of John Kennedy. There's a big divide.
Right.
I think we live in a soundbite culture. And John Kennedy's great soundbite is, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country.
Sorensen wrote that.
Well, that's his great soundbite that people remember
In
that
the
moment.
words of Ted Sorensen.
And the great soundbite of Ronald Reagan is Mr. Gorbachev, tear down that wall. And I'm afraid the soundbite of Bill Clinton will be, I did not have sexual relations with that woman, Monica Lewinsky.
The overused word du jour is agony, that the country can't bear the agony of an impeachment. Pat Moynihan says it shouldn't go through impeachment. It would destabilize the presidential office. 6 of the last 7 presidencies before Bill Clinton have been truncated either by scandal, assassination, or an aggrieved electorate. Would it be, can the country really be upset by what happens to presidents nowadays, or do they treat them rather as employees?
I think they do treat them as employees. That's one reason why the public is rather relaxed about Bill Clinton and gives him very high approval ratings. You could make that argument during the Cold War. Richard Nixon said after he was president that no future president will ever go through a Senate trial because the presidency was so important that you couldn't have the president in the dock for 6 or 8 months. Maybe that was true during the Cold War. One of the things I think we've seen in 1998 is that Americans see presidents as a lot more peripheral.
Well, Walter Mondale once said that the presidency's become the fire hydrant of the nation, talking about the group of presidents always kind of drummed out of office for one reason or another since Eisenhower. But I think what your answer really is that look at the 19th century. How little do we know about the presidents after Andrew Johnson? Ask most Americans what they know of Garfield or McKinley or Chester Arthur, and you know very little.
Chester Arthur reformed the civil service. Has this president done anything as lasting as Chester Arthur?
The real legacy is the balanced budget. It's the economy, and some people can argue he doesn't deserve credit for that. But I think historians will give him some credit for the boom era of the 1990s.
Mr. Bischoff, the question that comes up, what happened to the president as moral leader? And the British journalist famously once asked Prime Minister Harold Macmillan if he would give the British people a sense of purpose. He said if they want a sense of purpose, they should talk to their archbishops. Have we now adopted, shall we say, a European attitude that we don't look to public officials for even as moral exemplars?
I don't think so at all. A wise man once wrote that statecraft also has to be soulcraft. That's very true in the presidency. We've got it wound almost into our genetic code. I think that we give a president a lot more influence if he's able to also have that moral role. In Bill Clinton's case, I think Americans are willing to say he's managing the economy well, we have peace and prosperity, and we're willing to hold on for 2 more years. He would have had a lot more authority, I think, if they saw him also in that role of someone who they wanted to hold up their children to be like. One big test is going to be the year 2000. I think if you see candidates do extremely well who seem to be people who can fulfill that role almost in the way that Jimmy Carter did in 1976, I think in a way there's your answer.
Morality is a tricky word. Arthur Schlesinger Jr. once told me he was judging the Robert F. Kennedy Memorial Book Prize, and it was a dual winner that year, David Garrow's book of Martin Luther King. Dr. King was this great public moral leader, but he was not in his private life somebody who had morality. The other co-winner was Pol Pot, who was a dedicated family man, doted over his children, loyal to his wife, and Pol Pot murdered 1 million people. The question then becomes, how does one judge the term morality? It gets bandied about a lot, but I think we have to be careful on what one person's private morality is different than a general public morality.
Douglas Brinkley, Michael Beschloss, thank you very much for being with us. And George F. Will's publisher thanks you for that reference to one of his books.
Well deserved.
Next, our weekly roundtable with ABC News analysts Bill Kristol and George Stephanopoulos in a moment.
They are the most environmentally vulnerable of all living things. To commit to their future is to commit to ours. Southern Company, America's largest generator of electricity, is planting 20 million trees and pioneering the use of electric vehicles, all in a commitment to cleaner air. So as they take flight into the future, we'll be down here, helping to keep the environment clean and the power on. We are Southern Company, energy to serve your world.
daughters, sisters and wives. They are friends and partners. But 1 out of every 9 will be stricken with breast cancer. That's why GE created its Senograph technology. It helps doctors detect tumors earlier, so a remarkable 90% 5-year survival rate is possible. So that all our grandmothers and granddaughters, best friends and good neighbors, may live happier, healthier, and longer lives.
This week with Sam Donaldson and Cokie Roberts will continue in a moment. After this from our ABC stations.
Tonight, while you're away, is your landlord in your apartment? We found them snooping, stealing, peeping, and worse. How do you know? 2020 tonight, followed by The Practice.
Come on!
Join the celebration for Toyotathon's 20th anniversary and save on Sienna with extra value package savings up to $1,000. That's an incredible value for the minivan that was named a Consumer's Digest Best Buy. Lease Avalon, only $299 a month for Toyota's luxury sedan. All at Toyotathon's 20th anniversary. Going on now.
An exotic new way to lose weight. Monday at 5 on Eyewitness News.
Welcome to our roundtable, where we give you strong opinions every week, which you can take or leave. George Stephanopoulos, Bill Kristol, good to see you again. So there's a great push now, at least in Washington, for censure rather than a full-blown Senate trial. Bill, what do you make of that?
I don't really think there's such a great push. The senators on January 7th, I believe, will all swear an oath to do impartial justice according to the Constitution and the laws, and the trial will begin. And I'm not confident that it will be aborted by a censure resolution. Not at all confident. Lots of people would like to get out of casting a tough vote. Lots of people would like to spare the country the alleged agony of a trial. I don't think it'll happen.
Yeah, there's a will, but there's not necessarily a way. I mean, and the president right now wants to have a censure resolution, at least he says he does, but it might be in his long-term political interest to go straight through a trial and hold on for an acquittal. And once there's an acquittal, you're not going to get a censure.
Well, you're certainly not going to get one he's going to sign
right.
if there's an acquittal, George.
Well, this week, the Senate's intellectual, Pat Moynihan, tried to provide a theory to justify an appetite. The appetite is for censure, and his theory is that we are the indispensable nation and we mustn't destabilize the presidency. Now, that poses the question in an interesting way. Does being the indispensable nation mean that the president himself is indispensable, whoever he is at any time? And second, can you destabilize the presidency by keeping Bill Clinton as well as by removing Bill Clinton?
Well, I think a lot of people think you do if, in fact, you believe he's committed crimes and you say, in effect, pass, please, because you're the president, but for everybody else, in the slammer.
Well, the logic of Mr. Moynihan's formulation is that because the United States is the sole remaining superpower, nuclear-armed, et cetera, unique responsibilities, so long as we are in that role, which means entering into the next century and beyond, impeachment is a dead letter in the Constitution. It's simply too risky.
That's right, but Moynihan's argument may have already come true. I mean, we have seen 6 of the last 7 presidents not finish full 2 terms of office, except for Ronald Reagan, and it's hard to see how much more harm could be done by going through the trial.
But Moynihan, I think, has it exactly backwards, though. If the president has dishonored his office, as the Democrats' censure resolution in the House says, he should be removed from office. If he isn't removed from office, if it doesn't reach impeachable offenses, then the Senate should not pass a resolution saying he's dishonored his office. The worst thing you can do is have a president in office for 2 years, officially stamped by another branch of government, dishonorable. That really is bad for the country. Well, I would much prefer to see him acquitted than censured. I personally think he should.
So Bill Kristol and Bill Clinton agree on something.
We do agree. Bill Clinton thinks he didn't lie under oath. I think he did lie under oath. I think if he lied under oath, he should be removed from office. But it's justice. It's, you know, there's all this talk about stability, destabilizing the office. The senators swear an oath to justice. Justice is the end of government, Madison says in Federalist 51.
If you prefer something a little lower class, Superman's motto, truth, justice, and the American way will prevail. But let me pick up on something you said. There also is an appetite to get the president to confess. A lot of people, particularly Republicans, you see, say if he will only confess that he perjured himself, or if you don't want to use the word perjury, lied under oath, which of course is the definition of perjury, as long as it's a material matter, then we'll let him up.
But that is how you restore honor to the office. I guess I
Well,
disagree
why won't
with
he confess? You know him better than any of us.
I think there's one big reason right now. He doesn't believe that he lied under oath. I think that's the most important reason. Secondly, I think he does fear, and they always have feared, that if he admits it, that will create some kind of domino effect and cause people to take your position that if he has said he lied under oath, he must be removed from
Ronald
office.
Reagan never quite believed that he sold arms for hostages, but his wise men around him, particularly Senator Howard Baker, who was chief of staff, told him, in effect, sir, if you don't, and on March 6th he did, say to the nation what everyone believes. There's going to be an impeachment investigation.
For sheer spectator,
and so he said it.
For sheer spectator sport, as a serious augmentation of the public stock of harmless pleasure, I recommend watching the senators try to write a censure resolution. Because the same Democrats who said he dishonored his office stood there and clapped while Al Gore said, one of the greatest presidents we've ever had. The president says, I've done nothing other than in my personal life. Now try and write a censure resolution that has any meaning to it whatever.
Which is why you're probably going to have a much longer trial than people have been expecting this week. Once you start to write it, you can't get the 50 votes for adjournment, and the president's not going to agree.
I know there are a couple of people at the White House, and I don't pretend to know them all, and I'm not speaking about the president or Mrs. Clinton, because I have not discussed this with them, who worry about a Senate trial going all the way. All this talk about they never get 67 votes. These people say, we can't be certain. Once a dynamic begins, once people look at the evidence, who knows what the public mood will be? You might get 67 votes.
Furthermore, the longer the trial goes on, then the Moynihan argument comes back to bite Mr. Moynihan, because a long trial could conceivably harm the nation, destabilize the presidency, cripple us as the indispensable nation, et cetera, and then all the criteria that Pat Moynihan has laid out for not impeaching become arguments
all of that is true,
removal.
but weigh that against the final result. If the president believes in the long run that at the end of a long trial he will be acquitted and there will not be censure, he will be hearing a lot of his allies say, fight it out to the end.
But what does he do about the historians? Because apparently they're going to look at the evidence.
Historians are all Democrats. They're going to write it anyway.
We don't know.
No, there were 2 or 3, some of them related to some of us at this table who are not entirely liberal Democrats. Look, the president addressed that this week in his interview with Elizabeth Strogan of the LA Times. He chortled about the impeachment vote, and he compared himself to Ulysses S. Grant. He said, you know, Lincoln famously said about Grant, he had these vices, but I wish all my generals had vices. Grant drank a little too much. Clinton compared himself to Grant as if his vices are merely a laughing matter. He's totally...
wait a second, he was at a party.
Excuse me, what the Lincoln anecdote was, they came to him and said, Mr. President, General Grant is drunk. And Grant, of course, was the first winning general here for the Army of the Potomac. And Lincoln reportedly said, well, find out what brand he drinks. I want to send a case to every one of my other generals. In the case of Bill Clinton, what are you suggesting?
He told that story about himself, comparing himself to Grant, which is
send what to every other president?
Clinton laughed about the fact that Larry Flint is outing people in Washington. He regaled listeners at this party with an account of Larry Flint's letter to Ken Starr, congratulating him for allegedly publishing pornography. Bill Clinton's mood is not that of a chastened man worried about history.
None of us know what Bill Clinton's mood is right now. He was
what
at
do
a
you
party.
think it is?
I think he is probably personally, obviously devastated by this, and he must know in his heart that what's going to be next to his name forever is impeachment. But where he's right, I think, on the judgment of history will be the judgment of the Congress and the Times. People will look back at this and say, how did it come to pass that there was a partisan impeachment? But he's wrong about the judgment on himself. It's going to be that he was impeached.
Well, he's going to look back there, and they're going to say, this is what he said under oath, and it appears to be a variance with the facts, and that appears to be a crime.
Who cares about his inner life anyway? This is not about anyone's inner life. This is about hygiene for the regime. You know, everyone's involved in this confessional culture. Speaker after speaker in the House debate got up and talked about themselves. They said, I'm having a hard day. I wish I'd never come to this. My, this is hard on me. Who cares?
But George, isn't the...
We need to break, but I want to just go back to the Larry Flint thing. So Larry Flint, the publisher of Hustler, outs what, 8 or 9 more Republicans as having had some sexual misdeeds in their past. Does that do anything?
I think we ought to resolve not to talk about him, because that's exactly what he wants, us to talk about him.
Okay, Mr. Flint, you've had your moment here. No more for you. We'll be back in just a moment.
Why is our company tagline a question?
I actually just started on Monday, so I really don't know.
Well, you can't make software better until you know what people want to do with it.
What do you want to do?
What do you want to do?
What are kids really doing with technology, and why is it helping them learn?
And we've noticed you tend to do some pretty amazing things.
How can I make a computer easier for you to use?
Email's going to be like the telephone. You pick it up, you call somebody, you don't think twice.
Things we never would have imagined.
What if your computer could recognize your face?
In fact, we do our best work trying to keep up with your imagination.
I design software for people like my dad, my mother, my neighbors.
What gets you up in the morning? What are you passionate about?
It has to be for kids, for all different types of people to use it.
What if a computer could talk to you?
What if your computer turned on like a lamp?
So our tagline? In part, it's an invitation to you. In part, it's a question, because we really need to know the answer. So we'll ask it again. Where do you want to go today?
Every moment, every dream, every challenge, for every step you take in life, there's GE, a financial partner you can trust. Take advantage of our expertise in insurance and investments and get the innovation you've come to expect. So think of GE when you think of insurance and investments for every step you take.
You know what? Kids who have mentors do better in school. It's true. They're less likely to start a fight or use drugs or drink. Here's the point. Mentors really matter to kids in need. Will you help? Make this your next call. Children first.
ABC's the place to be on New Year's Day. Our College Bowl celebration begins as Michigan meets Arkansas in the CompUSA Florida Citrus Bowl. Then, the Bowl Championship Series kicks off. UCLA meets Wisconsin in the Rose Bowl presented by AT&T. And in prime time, Ohio State meets Texas A&M in the Nokia Sugar Bowl. It all begins at 11 a.m. with the Tournament of Roses Parade. That's New Year's Day on ABC.
All right, let's look ahead to the year 2000. We've disposed of this president. We don't know how, but his term will end at some point.
We've been trying at least, right?
Truth, justice, and the American way. But in the year 2000, we'll have another election. So what happens? George?
Well, on the Democratic side, the presumption is a sitting vice president who wants the nomination of his party gets it. Everyone except Alvin Barkley since the Second World War has done. So if you assume that, then it's Gore against whom? Any Republican wanting to run for president had better have $20 million minimum in the bank by January of the year 2000. If you start today, you must raise $400,000 a week. How many people can do that?
You sit in your office and you use a telephone.
George Bush can do it because he's governor of a large state. Steve Forbes can do it because he inherited it. McCain can do it because he's chairman of the Commerce Committee, which has many interested clients. And he says, and others say, that Lamar Alexander can because he has a well-developed machine. Aside from that, I think the campaign finance laws have already weeded the field.
But doesn't
down
McCain have a problem because he's been such an outspoken advocate of campaign finance?
He has an
reform?
embarrassment. That's not the same thing as a problem.
Does everyone agree that Gore is going to be the nominee?
No, I'm the big dissenter on Gore. George will say I'm crazy, and George knows more about Democratic primaries than I do, but I think Bill Bradley is a credible alternative to Al Gore. I think he can raise the money. I think by 2000, people may not want someone who has defended Bill Clinton and said Bill Clinton will go down in history as a great president. And I like Bill Bradley's chances.
But hard to imagine.
What would a debate between Gore and Bradley look like? Some wag has said, you know, it's dull and duller.
But that's the right that is the right question. What issues does Bradley choose to define himself on? In a Democratic primary, it is not going to help him to be a harsher critic of the president than Vice President Gore. The only issues he's said so far that he disagrees on is welfare reform. It's unclear unless the economy tanks that he's going to be able to get much traction on that. So he is going to have to find a rationale.
And here I think is where, again, the campaign finance laws are going to winnow the field artificially. Because you say he can raise $20 million. I don't think he can.
Right. If, in fact, Gore is the nominee, and let's just talk not against the field, Bush or what have you, does being part of the Clinton-Gore administration hurt him badly?
I think it hurts because I think the country's strongest desire in the year 2000 is going to be to take a shower.
Well, Michael Beschloss went back to 1976 when Jimmy Carter played on the theme of I'll never lie to you, I'll never mislead you, we're a great country, Vietnam didn't hurt us, CIA didn't hurt us, playing against the Nixon the Nixon darkness. So does Gore defend himself by saying, what administration? I wasn't really part of that.
Not
or does he go right down as a loyal vice president, now running in his own right?
I think he feels rightly that there's no penalty for loyalty. When he's running for president. The difficulty for the vice president, or what will help him, I should say, is if the Republicans overplay their hand, as many would argue they did in the House vote on impeachment. If they continue to push these kinds of issues throughout 1999, then the vice president could separate himself a little from the president.
Does he separate himself? Hubert Humphrey waited too long to separate himself from Lyndon Johnson in the Vietnam War.
You can't. Every vice president ends up defending the administration of which he was part, and his election or his defeat is a referendum on that administration. Bush won in '88 because people were reasonably happy with Reagan after 8 years. Humphrey was hurt badly in '68 because we had the war in Vietnam and the riots in the cities. I don't think Gore's election will be a judgment on Clinton, and it will be a chance for the American people, incidentally, to register, leave aside the polls, to register a serious judgment on Bill Clinton.
But wait a second. What if the country is still doing okay? What if the economy? What if there is no recession? What if people are forced to say we want to support the policies of Clinton and the progress the country has made without the president?
Then Gore's in good
shape.
I agree.
No, he's not, because that assumes that it's the economy, stupid. My view of American politics is we almost never vote on the economy. Sometimes we sublimate moral arguments in economic terms. When Andrew Jackson waged war on the bank, that was ostensibly an economic issue. It was about virtue, as a kind of people we were
in
going to be.
'92, you don't think the economy was a big part of George Bush's defeat?
I think it was somewhat part of it, but I think more it was a judgment that George Bush seemed to have lost interest in the presidency as an important institution.
All right, if Gore's the nominee, or whoever the Democratic nominee is, he runs against someone. George W. Bush now is the favorite. I mean, all of us smart guys say he's the leader. Is he the leader? Does he get the nomination?
Well, he is the leader, overwhelmingly so in the polls. That could be a problem for him. You know, he is like a stock, an IPO that comes out at 200 times earnings, and the first time there's an actual earnings result, prospective earnings, and then there's an actual earnings result, and it's a little disappointing, and suddenly the stock plummets. That's his challenge now. He's way ahead of the rest of the field, but he hasn't had to fight nationally. He hasn't had to say what his position is on lots of issues. I think it's risky being that far ahead
and it's
when
not
you're
only
untested.
That, all presidential candidates need kind of a training period. He's not going to get that. He's not going to be able to go out on the stump, perfect his stump speech, because too many people are going to be watching him because he's the front runner.
Bill Clinton didn't get a training period.
Sure he did. No, absolutely. The fall of
Governor of
1991. No, the fall of 1991, he was able to go out and work the party.
One of the most destabilizing, explosive forces in modern life is boredom, particularly when it afflicts the press. And by September of 1999, the press will be bored to tears with George Bush, and they'll want a new storyline. And that's the moment of opportunity for someone like
who would it be?
Well, McCain is an obvious candidate.
McCain's an obvious candidate, and of course I keep bringing up General Colin Powell.
You would.
I think to the extent he missed his chance in 1996, I think he could have beaten the president. We'll never know, of course. But it may not be too late. Shakespeare may have gotten it a little wrong when he said that taken at the tide leads on and missed it. Maybe he has another chance. What do you think?
He has a chance. Look, I think it's wide open. I really do think it's wide open. I think we don't know what's going to happen over the next year and a half, whether the economy will stay strong, whether foreign policy crises will really blow up, which presumably helps a McCain or a Powell. And I also wouldn't rule out Steve Forbes or even someone like Gary Bauer, a real long shot. The conservative Republican primary voters will want a Reagan.
Right.
They don't really want a Bush.
Can he be elected, though? Can a Steve Forbes or a Gary Bauer be elected even if he were the nominee?
If they got nominated, they could be elected. People said Reagan couldn't be elected in 1980. He won the nomination. He got elected.
It's very different to go from leader of a ginger group here in Washington, as Gary Bauer is, as opposed to a two-term governor of the largest state.
But the question
is,
there
put all my
any
money on it,
candidate, probably not Powell, but is there any candidate like Powell who can bring new voters into the Republican primaries? That would have been his promise in 1996. Is there a Jesse Ventura out there for the Republican Party? It doesn't seem to be right now, but that's in the nature of
What
the
if
beast.
Jesse the Mind Ventura decided to run for the nomination of the Democratic Party?
He would lose. Paul Wellstone from Minnesota will do better than Jesse Ventura.
Well, we'll see. Anyone want to make a final prediction as the year draws to a close on who the nominees will be in 2000?
Here's one prediction. Paul McHale, the Democrat from Pennsylvania who called on Clinton to resign and who's now left the House as the Republican vice presidential nominee.
Wow. Any woman have a chance?
I think Elizabeth Dole will be the Republican vice presidential nominee.
Shot in the dark.
We're out of time.
We're out of time. Koki will be back next week to pick up the cudgels for women. And I'll be back at